I got back from deployment on a Monday morning, still half tasting sand and jet fuel. 10 months overseas, and all I wanted was to sleep in my own bed and see the workshop I spent 5 years building behind my house. That workshop was my sanctuary where I built furniture, repaired gear for the neighbors, and kept my mind steady when I wasn't deployed. But the second I pulled into my driveway, I knew something was wrong. The concrete slab was still there, but the building, gone, completely leveled. My tools, my gear, vanished. I stood there, duffel bag at my feet, heart pounding. What the hell? I muttered. That's when I heard the heels, clicking down the sidewalk like a metronome of bad decisions. I turned and saw her, Harriet Thompson, president of the HOA. Middle-aged, bleach-blonde bob, pink cardigan, clipboard clutched like a weapon. She looked like she just stepped out of a Juice Cleanse commercial. "Oh, you're back early," she said, smiling like she just won a raffle. "Where's my workshop?" I asked, barely keeping my voice level. Harriet's eyes flicked to the empty slab. "Oh, that old thing? Yes, we had it removed. It was in violation of community standards." I blinked. "You demolished my building while I was deployed." "Well," she said, waving her hand, "you didn't respond to our letters." "I was in Iraq." "Yes, well, that's not really an excuse for ignoring the HOA's correspondence, now is it?" I laughed. "It was either that or scream." "You tore down a permitted structure. Do you even know how illegal that is?" Harriet's smile wavered for the first time. "It's not illegal if the HOA board approves it, and the board voted unanimously." "You mean you and your 2 little friends?" I said. "That's not a board. That's a book club with a power trip." Her face tightened. "Watch your tone, Mr. Lorman." Oh, now I was Mr. Lorman. I took a deep breath and stepped forward until we were eye to eye. "You better pray you documented every single thing you did, because I'm not letting this go." Harriet straightened her posture and sniffed. "You're welcome to file a complaint." "I'm not filing a complaint," I cut in. "I'm filing a lawsuit." I walked past her, still stunned, still trying to wrap my head around the fact that my entire workshop, my tools, projects, memories had been bulldozed while I was thousands of miles away serving my country. By the next day, I had already called an attorney. A real one. Not one of Harriet's wine night buddies who pretended to know the law. And I pulled every permit, every inspection report, every receipt. I had a folder thicker than a phone book by the end of the week. And then I got my hands on the HOA meeting minutes. Oh, they were going to regret ever touching my property. By Friday morning, I was sitting across from Detective Carla Nguyen in a small conference room at the sheriff's substation, every document I'd collected laid out in front of her. She was flipping through the HOA meeting minutes I'd printed, a red pen dancing in her left hand as she made marks beside certain names and dates. "They really did this without a court order?" she asked, not looking up. There was no court order, no injunction, not even a notice taped to my door. Just a backhoe and a pile of splinters. She tapped the pen on the demolition invoice I'd pulled from the county records office. "This contractor, Silver Pines Property Services, you recognize the name? Never heard of them until yesterday. Looks like they were paid through the HOA's discretionary maintenance fund." Her eyebrows lifted. "That fund is usually for landscaping, sidewalk repairs, maybe repainting a common mailbox, not for raising a private structure." "Exactly. And if you look at the contractor's payout, the total is just under the threshold that would require a community vote." She leaned back in her chair. "Clever, illegal but clever." I nodded at the invoice. "There's more. That company, registered to Harriet Thompson's nephew, same last name. Filed the LLC 3 months ago." Carla gave a low whistle and closed the folder. "All right, I'll open a report. This is looking like criminal mischief, possibly conspiracy to defraud, maybe even misuse of community funds." "That's a start," I said, "but I want that workshop rebuilt. Exactly the way it was. We'll get there. For now, I'll get a warrant to pull their HOA financials. If they misappropriated funds, we'll know." Back home, I was greeted by a clipboard hanging from my front door. Another notice of non-compliance. This one said something about my grass being 1.5 inches over the approved height. I laughed, actually laughed, and ripped it to shreds. That night, I installed 2 new motion-activated cameras, one facing the street, the other covering the left side of the property. I wasn't giving them any more chances to sneak around. By Sunday, word had spread. My neighbor, Louis, a retired teacher who lived 2 houses down, knocked on my door with a casserole dish in one hand and a binder in the other. "I heard what they did," he said. "Thought you might want to see this." The binder was full of letters, notes, and printouts of emails, complaints from other residents going back over a year. All of them involved the HOA abusing their power. Fines for invisible violations, mailbox flags in the wrong shade of red, kids' bikes being confiscated from yards. They've been pushing people around for years, but this, he shook his head, this is different. This is theft. Did you know they hired Harriet's nephew to do the demolition? Louis nodded. He's the one who overcharged us for that pointless security fence last summer around the community pool, said it was to keep out undesirables. Let me guess, I said. No bids from other contractors. None that we ever saw, just a line item on the quarterly report. I called my attorney, Amanda Greer, the next morning. By Tuesday, she had filed a civil suit against the HOA for property destruction, breach of fiduciary duty, and abuse of authority. She also submitted a formal complaint to the state's Department of Consumer Protection, specifically their HOA Oversight Division. Wednesday brought a knock on the door. Not Harriet. This time it was Ron Bell, one of the HOA board members, or rather, Harriet's lapdog. He reeked of desperation and cheap aftershave. "Hey, Mr. Lorman," he said, shifting from foot to foot. "Just wanted to clear the air. We didn't mean for things to get out of hand. It was a misunderstanding." "You demolished a building without permission," I said. "There's no misunderstanding there." "Well, technically, you're being investigated for criminal conspiracy." His face paled. "We were just following Harriet's lead. She said you didn't have the right permits." "I do, every single one stamped and signed." "Want to see them?" He backed up a step. No, that's all right. Just thought maybe we could talk about dropping the lawsuit. I'll talk when my workshop is rebuilt, my tools replaced, and Harriet resigns." He blinked. "You want her to step down? I want her barred from serving on any board." "Ever again?" He mumbled something about needing to speak with the others and left. That night, Carla called. "Got a hit," she said. "We pulled the HOA's bank statements. Turns out over $70,000 was funneled to that contracting company over the past 6 months. All under emergency repairs, no itemized breakdowns, no receipts. Think you can charge them? We're preparing a referral to the DA. If even half of this holds up, this could go to grand jury. Might be some jail time in the cards." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon in the community clubhouse. I arrived 15 minutes early with Amanda, Louis, and about 20 other neighbors, all of them holding copies of the complaint, notes, or just a general look of fury. Harriet was already seated at the head of the folding table, flanked by Ron and Marcia, the treasurer. The second she saw Amanda's briefcase, her face froze. "This is a closed meeting," she said. Amanda didn't even blink. "Not anymore. We're here under the state's Open HOA Governance Act. Section 3, Paragraph 1. Any meeting where financial matters involving community funds are discussed must be open to residents." Harriet stammered. "This isn't about—" Amanda pulled out a stack of subpoenas and dropped them on the table. "It is now." Louis stepped forward, holding up a photo of my demolished workshop. "This is what you did. And we all let you get away with things for too long. That ends today." What followed was a 2-hour reckoning. Residents brought up fines they'd paid for made-up infractions, misuse of maintenance funds, and threats they'd received for speaking out. Amanda presented the timeline of the demolition, the fraudulent contractor payments, and the criminal investigation. Marcia cracked first. She admitted she'd been signing checks without seeing backup documentation. Harriet said she'd handle it, she whispered. Ron looked ready to cry. I didn't know it'd go this far. Harriet tried to fight back, but Amanda hit her with a cease and desist letter, ordering her to stop representing the HOA until the legal case was resolved. By the end of the meeting, the board had no choice. A special vote was called to suspend Harriet indefinitely and appoint an interim committee. I was nominated as a temporary advisor, pending the outcome of the investigation. That night, I got a call from Silver Pines Property Services. A very nervous voice on the other end said, "We're ready to rebuild the workshop. No charge, just send us the plans." I didn't answer right away. I was standing in the backyard, staring at the empty slab under the moonlight. "Tell your boss to submit a proposal to my attorney," I said. "And it better match what was there before, down to the last screw." I hung up, feeling the weight of 10 months overseas finally lifting, not because the fight was over, but because it had finally begun in the right direction. By the following weekend, the slab behind my house wasn't so empty anymore. The contractor Harriet's nephew had already dropped off materials, and a crew of 2 who looked more like they were being punished than paid. They avoided eye contact, worked in silence, and packed up the moment the sun dipped low. Amanda said their offer to rebuild was likely a weak attempt at damage control, maybe even a condition dangled by their lawyer to soften the inevitable charges. I didn't care why they were doing it. I only cared that it was done right. I wasn't the only one keeping watch. Half the neighborhood had taken an interest. Cars slowed when they passed the open gate. People lingered by their fences, pretending to water plants or organize their garages. After years of being bullied by the HOA, folks were starting to realize they had power too, especially when they stood together. Midweek, I got a call from Carla Nguyen. "We got a warrant to search the HOA's storage unit," she said. "Found some interesting things." I stopped sorting through the salvaged scrap from the old workshop and leaned against the frame. "What kind of interesting?" "Handwritten ledgers. 2 sets of books, one for the official records and one for the real numbers." Looks like Harriet was skimming funds from community dues and rerouting them through shell vendors. "How much?" "Little over 94,000 over the last 3 years. I let out a low whistle. "She ever report that as income?" "Nope, and there's more. We found a list of names. Residents who'd been fined repeatedly. All of them happened to vote against Harriet in past elections or complained at meetings. Your name was circled, twice. Targeted enforcement, exactly. DA's office is preparing charges for financial misconduct, fraud, and retaliation. With the evidence we've got, she's looking at a prison sentence." I glanced at the fresh lumber stacked in my yard, and all because she couldn't stand a man having a shed. Carla's tone shifted. "Also, the state HOA Oversight Division is sending out an auditor. They're reviewing every board decision made over the last 2 years. If they find enough irregularities, they can dissolve the HOA leadership entirely." I hung up and walked to the edge of my yard. Lewis was out front, chatting with Marcy from the cul-de-sac. She was holding a clipboard and a stack of forms. When she saw me, she waved. "Got a minute?" she asked. "We're organizing a recall vote." I joined them by the curb. Marcy flipped to a blank page and held out a pen. "We need 70 signatures to force a full board election." "We've already got 42. Lewis added, "We figured with everything coming out, it's time we take control of the board. Get some people in there who aren't drunk on power." I signed without hesitation. That night, Amanda emailed over a copy of the contractor's revised reconstruction agreement. It included a clause stating that the rebuild would be subject to my approval at every stage, and that any deviation from the original plans would be corrected at their expense. I flagged one section where they tried to sneak in a waiver of liability, no surprise there, and sent it back marked up in red. The next day, I was standing by the property line when a city truck pulled up and parked half on the curb. A tall man with a clipboard and a badge introduced himself as Inspector Rourke from the Building Compliance Division. "Got a request from your attorney to verify structure specs before reconstruction," he said. Mind if I walk the slab? I watched as he took measurements, reviewed the old permit I handed him, and compared it to the new blueprints the contractor had submitted. He frowned once near the southeast corner. "Foundations still level," he said. "But they're going to need to match the original roof pitch or it won't pass final inspection." "I'll make sure they do," I said. He paused before leaving. "Just so you know, your case isn't the only one. We've had 3 other complaints about unauthorized structure changes in this neighborhood. I'd bet good money they're all tied back to the same board. You think they'll dig deeper? They already are. City Council's Housing Committee got wind of this. Apparently they're considering stronger oversight for private HOAs. Yours might become the poster child." The next afternoon, I spotted Ron Bell standing awkwardly outside my front gate. He had a manila envelope tucked under one arm and a nervous look like he hadn't slept in days. I walked over, arms crossed. "I came to return these," he said, holding out the envelope. "They're meeting transcripts, unedited ones. Harriet made us redact parts before giving them to residents. I thought you should have the originals." I flipped through them. Inside were minutes from over a dozen meetings, including several entries where Harriet had ordered unanimous votes without actually holding one. There were signatures that didn't match and missing witness statements. "Why now?" I asked. Ron hesitated. "Because I'm probably going to be named in the civil suit." I didn't stop her. I signed what she gave me. I didn't ask questions. "You still have a choice," I said. "You can testify. Help us clean this up." He gave a weak nod and walked back to his car without another word. By Friday, the workshop frame was up and the roof trusses were being installed. The crew worked faster now, like they were trying to outrun something. I made a habit of checking every measurement myself, walking the perimeter twice a day, taking photos and notes. Amanda said to document everything. I did. Then came the knock on my door I didn't expect. It was Harriet. Her hair wasn't styled, her usual pink cardigan replaced by a wrinkled blouse. She looked smaller somehow, not just in stature but in presence. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I don't think that's a good idea." She stepped back, but not away. "They served me with charges, officially. There's going to be a hearing, I know. They said you gave them everything." "I did." She looked down, then back up. "I lost my job yesterday." "They found out about the dual bank accounts." I studied her face. No tears, no remorse, just fear. "You came here hoping for sympathy?" I asked. "I came to ask if you'd consider dropping the lawsuit. I can't afford a settlement." "I'm going to lose everything." "You already took everything from me," I said, "and I had to rebuild it from the ground up." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There were no excuses left to give. I stepped back and shut the door. 2 weeks later, the workshop was finished. Identical dimensions, same layout, new materials. I stood inside, ran my hand along the fresh oak workbench and took a long breath. It didn't erase what happened, but it was something solid, something earned. The recall vote passed with 83 signatures. A new board was elected. Marcy took over as president. Lewis joined as treasurer. The first thing they did was implement a transparency policy: open meetings, recorded votes, and budget disclosures posted monthly. Harriet was indicted on 4 felony counts. Ron testified. Marcia cooperated. The DA offered plea deals in exchange for restitution and lifetime bans from HOA participation. The community changed after that. Neighbors talked more. Kids rode bikes without being chased off. People planted what they wanted in their yards. It wasn't perfect, but it was free. As for the workshop, I spent the next few months filling it back up. Friends donated tools. A few veterans from my unit pooled together and shipped a new lathe. It became more than a place to build things, it became a symbol of what happens when people stand up. When they stop accepting fear as policy. When they fight back with facts, not fists. The HOA tried to break me. Instead, they made me the reason it all came crashing down. The morning the final inspection passed, I was in the middle of organizing the new tool chest when a white sedan with tinted windows pulled up across the street. I watched from inside the workshop as 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They weren't city inspectors. Suits like that didn't show up for code violations. One of them approached cautiously, flipping open a leather-bound badge. Special Agent DeWitt, Department of Justice. We're following up on a federal referral related to your HOA. I motioned him inside, and we sat at the steel workbench while the other agent remained outside, speaking into a radio. I thought everything was already moving through the county, I said, handing him a flash drive Amanda had prepared with scanned documents and timestamps. It is, DeWitt replied, plugging it into his tablet. But this goes beyond local fraud. We've uncovered evidence that the HOA submitted forged grant requests for community development funds. That's federal money. I leaned back, processing. What kind of grants? Improvement subsidies meant for low-income housing areas. Your neighborhood doesn't qualify, but someone falsified census data to push it through. The same people, he nodded. The board president submitted the applications using a shell nonprofit created 2 years ago. Funds were then routed into private accounts. We've traced nearly $130,000. I stared at the polished concrete floor. You're saying Harriet committed wire fraud, among other things. We're building a case for federal charges. You'll likely be contacted by our attorneys. There's a chance some of your documents may be used in court. I stood and grabbed a folder from the filing cabinet. There's one more thing. I found this in the HOA records Ron gave me. Inside was a printed email thread between Harriet and a city planning clerk. In it, she pressured the clerk to backdate a zoning notice, one that would have made my workshop appear non-compliant months after it was already approved. The request was denied, but the intent was clear. DeWitt scanned it, then looked up, expression harder than before. This is obstruction. She tried to falsify government records. You just gave us enough for a second indictment. He left with the new evidence, and for the first time since I'd come home, I felt the tide was fully turning. The next HOA meeting was held under the new board in the same drab clubhouse as before, but everything felt different. Chairs were full, neighbors talked openly, and the air didn't hum with tension. Marcy opened the meeting with a list of reforms, including a motion to hire a third-party auditor to review all HOA decisions from the past 5 years. It passed unanimously. Then she turned to me. There's one more item. Mr. Lorman, we'd like to formally recognize your efforts in holding this board accountable. I stood, nodding once. I didn't do it alone. Every one of you who spoke out, who kept records, who showed up, you made this happen. A quiet round of applause followed, not loud but genuine. After the meeting, I stepped outside and found Louis leaning against the railing, a takeout coffee balanced on the wooden post. We're holding a barbecue next Saturday, he said. Figured it's time we celebrated the fact we can. I'll bring the smoker, I said. You always do. By the middle of the week, news vans had made their way into the neighborhood. Word of the federal investigation hit the local channels, and a few national outlets picked up the story. Headlines read like something out of a crime show. HOA president indicted on federal fraud charges. Veterans' property demolished in HOA power play. Neighborhood uprising sparks reform. I got 2 interview requests, both of which I declined. I wasn't looking to be anyone's headline. I just wanted my life back. But then the city council invited me to speak at a public hearing about HOA regulation. Amanda encouraged it. It's your chance to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else, she said, so I went. The chamber was full when I stood at the podium. I didn't prepare a speech, just spoke plainly. I served overseas to protect the rights we all take for granted. When I came home, they destroyed something I built with my own hands, not because it was wrong, but because someone decided they could. That's not a community. That's rule by fear and silence. The council passed 2 new ordinances that month, one requiring city oversight for all HOA elections, and another mandating financial transparency laws for any HOA managing more than 20 homes. It wasn't sweeping reform, but it was more than symbolic. Back home, the workshop had become more than a place to tinker. I started hosting weekend classes, basic woodworking, tool safety, even a small engine repair group for local teenagers. One of the kids, Marcus, was the same boy Harriet once tried to fine for leaving a basketball hoop near the sidewalk. Now he was rebuilding lawnmowers with his uncle and asking if I had any old chainsaws he could take apart. That spring, Amanda invited me to a ceremony downtown. I had no idea what it was until I arrived and saw a crowd gathered outside the courthouse. She handed me a citation sealed in a glass frame. "For civic leadership and community resilience," she said. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and shook the mayor's hand. The federal trial began that summer. Harriet pled guilty to 3 charges: wire fraud, falsifying public records, and misappropriation of federal funds. She was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to the community. Her assets, 2 properties and a retirement fund, were liquidated under court order. Ron testified. Marcia cooperated. Both received deferred sentences and lifetime bans from holding any position of fiduciary responsibility. The court also revoked the nonprofit status of the shell charity Harriet had used to funnel funds. The Department of Justice issued a statement praising local cooperation. Carla Nguyen was promoted to lead investigator for community fraud cases. I sent her a thank you letter and a custom-made desk plaque carved from reclaimed cedar. The neighborhood changed in ways I hadn't expected. Residents started organizing community events, real ones, not just the forced HOA holiday parties. People painted their homes in colors they liked. Kids played in the cul-de-sacs without someone snapping photos to send to a violations committee. And me? I kept building. One afternoon, I stood outside the workshop, watching a group of kids sand down the frame of a picnic bench they were assembling for the park. The sun was warm. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh-cut pine. Lewis walked over holding a chilled bottle of water. "You ever think about running for city council?" he asked. I gave him a sideways glance. "I just got my garage back." "Still," he said. "You've got a knack for cutting through nonsense." I laughed. "Let me enjoy a few months of peace before I start another fight." He raised his bottle in a half-toast. "Fair enough." Later that evening, as the sky turned amber and the kids rolled off on their bikes, I locked up the workshop and stood on the patio, hands in my pockets. It was all still there. The slab, the new frame, the tools, the hum of a table saw waiting to be used. But more than that, it was mine again. Not just the space, but the quiet that came with knowing no one could take it from me, not anymore.